Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We will wait 2 minutes so that everyone have time enough to join this session. I think we can start 15 minutes. So yeah, hi everyone again. Welcome to today's webinar. We're excited to have you join us for the Optimizing Incident Management with StatusCast, hosted by On It Now. Today's session is presented by Eric Ward from Zurich, and he will introduce himself in a moment. During the session, during this webinar, you can ask questions via the chat, and we will do our best to address them. So now, my name is Salan van Zweden, and I hope you will find this session valuable. So, Eric, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Hey, everyone. How's it going today? My name is Eric Worth. I am a solutions engineer at Zurich. And before I was at Zurich, I was the co-founder of an application called StatusCast, which is why I'm here to talk with everybody today about StatusCast, how it can help your organization, a lot of what we've learned over the last decade, and how we can kind of couple that together with Zurich. So let's go ahead and get started. And as Sandra mentioned, feel free to send in some questions throughout the webinar. I'll do my best to try to get those answered live, or at the end, we'll save some time to go ahead and go back and review those. But let's go ahead and dive in. For today's webinar, the agenda that I'd like to go through, what I hope that everybody can kind of walk away from this with is, having a better idea about StatusCast and how it relates to incident management. Really why incident management is so important to all of us, understanding the idea of an incident from a status page's perspective, knowing how StatusCast can kind of interject itself. I want to talk about some real world examples because I think it's always nice to see how does this kind of correlate back to the real world. Then we'll look at some examples and dive into just a demo of the platform itself. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. What is StatusCast? A lot of people hear the name StatusCast and they initially think, a status page application, something similar to maybe like a down detector or a down gator. When I think of StatusCast overall, I would define us really specifically as an incident management tool that focuses on end user communication. And really, it all comes back to the idea of incident management. It's something that we, especially in the ITSM world, deal with, almost on a daily nature, which is the idea of, when an incident occurs, what are the processes that we have within our organization that can help us from the start of that incident occurring all the way to when it's concluded, and we provide an RCA and some additional information to our end users. And I think for a lot of organizations, this would be a pretty kind of accepted general layout of what does incident management mean to you. It starts with a new incident coming in. We have to internally categorize it, prioritize it, assign it to the right resource. That's when we can begin analyzing it and understanding what's going on. It's at this point where we might want to communicate with the end user. This is a piece that a lot of people don't do too well, often without something like a status page. We often sometimes might focus just on resolving the incident. Maybe we skip this piece altogether. And then eventually we have to close it out, provide some sort of root cause, our lessons learned, and so on. And this is a pretty straightforward take to incident management. Like I said, I think most people would agree this is a good generalization of it. But even if you have this implemented, there are still common challenges. If we don't have a really mature solution around incident management, there can still be some issues with it. lost productivity is one of the largest ones that we see within our industry. And I'm going to be talking a bit about lost productivity throughout this webinar today. But some other issues we run into are just inconsistent strategies. So people aren't exactly sure what they should do, who they should contact. There might be an inadequate kind of internal documentation. What should people effectively do when an outage occurs? If the answers to that aren't clear, then we are spending more time, we're wasting more time, we're losing our productivity even further. I even mentioned as well, narrowing our focus on only solving the issue. When or when incidents occur, it can be a very chaotic period for any organization. And, if we only focus on just solving the issue, sometimes we miss out on kind of correcting the chaos and kind of minimizing the impact that we're having overall. And so that's kind of what we want to speak to today. But, when we think about incident management, again, everyone agrees, yeah, our organization needs it, but why do we need it? And really at the end of the day, it's a pretty simple reasoning, and it's that time is money. We live in a world today where incidents are inevitable. There's not going to be a single organization that doesn't have the threat of a service outage because they're using a software as a service vendor, or they have something hosted on a cloud service, or maybe they're hosting something themselves in a data center. There are so many factors going into business and just the world these days where it's kind of impossible to get around the idea of an incident occurring. And so when it does occur, how much does it actually cost us? And this is something that I encourage everybody in this webinar today, go do a little bit of research in terms of downtime costs. You'll find a lot of information published by like Gartner or the observability platforms. I think this table I have right up here was published by Pingdom about a year and a half ago. And this tells us, again, the cost per minute of downtime, if you're an IT organization, could be $5,600. If you are manufacturing, $43. If you're just a large enterprise organization, maybe you're in a financial sector, it could be as much as $16,000 a minute burned up because of outages. And, again, there's a lot of factors that go into those, and let's kind of go one further slide to see, what kind of costs, how do we get to these numbers that people like Gartner and Pingdom are able to put out? And, there's a lot of factors into determining what does it cost us when an outage occurs. First there are, items like the customer impact. Whenever we have large outages, our brand, our kind of our reputation as a whole, it could be at stake. And if we're having issues from that perspective, we might be losing customers, we might be experiencing a higher churn. Similarly, employee turnover. If you've ever been in a support role and you've been at an organization that has a lot of issues, it can burn you out. If you're constantly dealing with the support kind of vortex of stuff happening, people yelling at you, things being high pressure, it's going to cause burnout. You're going to have employees leave, and that's quite costly to an organization as well. And then the last one is really kind of the largest one we think about from the StatusCast perspective, which is just simply productivity. When an unexpected incident occurs, we are just simply going to see productivity on a lot of different fronts stop. And that is a lot of times sort of a hidden cost that people don't think about, because all of a sudden what you wanted to do with your day, that work task you wanted to complete, now all of a sudden you have something up in the way of that. And maybe it's causing you to take time out of your day to complete that. You can't get other things done. It's creating a vortex of issues from this idea of productivity lost. And so all of these factors together and really more go into this idea that we had in the previous slide, that every minute that occurs where a service is out, it's costing you money. And so if you don't have a in-depth or, if you don't have a thought out incident management process that can handle that and streamline that process, it can elongate the outage itself. And that can, at the end of the day, cost you and your organization a lot more money. And so, again, we keep kind of theoretically talking about the idea of an incident. This is where I like to kind of start to think about really, how can we, if we want to improve this process, how can we look at and kind of break down an incident and understand kind of the core parts to it? And to me, in my over a decade of experience dealing with status pages, incident management in general, I like to look at an incident really from the perspective of the timeline and those who are going to be impacted. And so this little GIF that we have up here, there's really three primary audiences at play when an unexpected outage occurs. We can see here pops up from the back, it's our customer who experienced the issue. our support engineers who have to deal with the influx of tickets, and then the DevOps, the technical people in the back end, the people who are responsible for fixing stuff, getting it resolved, and so on. And so another way to look at this might just be to kind of, again, consider the timeline of an incident. So again, in a very general perspective, let's say a server crashes, right? Again, some observability setup like a logic monitor sees that a server is no longer replying. You're getting a 500 URL served back. What's inevitably the next likely thing that's going to happen? Someone is always going to go and try to use the product. I spent a long time in support, and I know for a fact that when something goes down, you just are always going to have somebody almost immediately run into it. And so when this happens, this is where we kind of introduce our first player or actor into the story of the incident, right? The end user, the person who they wanted to get to a SharePoint portal, they wanted to access an SAP database, but they couldn't. So what's going to naturally happen to them? Again, they couldn't do what they wanted to do. They're likely going to try to troubleshoot the issue. Maybe they're going to try and delete some cookies, go into a different browser, restart a computer. Those things are taking up time. Naturally, a lot of people will also just go ask a team member or a colleague, hey, I can't get into SharePoint. Can you get into SharePoint? That same colleague's going to run into that issue. They may go through some of those steps. So we're kind of creating a vortex of the end user's day, again, being disrupted. They couldn't do what they wanted to do. Now they're taking additional steps to do that. What's usually the next logical thing any end user like that's going to do? They are going to go contact support. And the reality with a lot of incidents is that we are getting an influx of support tickets all about the same thing. If your organization is supporting 2,000 end users and you have a pretty big outage crop up, you could easily have 50 or 75 tickets come up saying, hey, this is down, what's up? And you might have a tool like something like Zurint, which gives you some nice capabilities to group things together, so that way you're not having to individually answer 75 of them, but you still have to kind of put them into the group. You still have to get that added in there. If they come in after the fact, you have to make sure they get the message. This can be something that easily starts to absorb an entire support team's time. We go from one person working on a ticket, another person coming in and do their scheduled shifts, to 4 people just having to sit there and sending out the same message. We're aware of what's going on. We'll get back to you when you have an update. And usually it's at that same point where support teams are becoming overwhelmed. People are freaking out that we now want to go sidetrack the technical folks. I have a stakeholder who's freaking out. Can you give me just a quick summary of what's going on? Support has no real clue. They're just kind of the front line. I need to go talk to DevOps. Well, the problem here is a lot of organizations, they start to sidetrack those people who are responsible for looking into the issue, who are responsible for maybe getting it back up and running, or enacting maybe disaster recovery protocols. We want to keep them focused, on this task, but in a lot of cases, we are sidetracking them. And so again, going back to this idea of productivity, the user's day has been disrupted, support is disrupted, and the DevOps folks, they were disrupted because of the incident anyways, but as part of their job requirements, they are probably being sidetracked from that main piece of evaluating the issue. So if we were to kind of just summarize that a little bit differently, like I said, the end user's day becomes disrupted, support is wasting time, they're getting an influx of tickets all about the same thing, and then DevOps is getting pinged from multiple sources asking for updates, and they're losing sight of the issue. I can't tell you how many organizations I've talked to whose current incident management strategy has them going and manually updating some like old status page, where it sometimes takes like an engineer 20 minutes to publish a change to a status page because they had to go and rewrite some HTML. They had to get the CDNs to update. It's just nuts how much time can simply be wasted within a process like this. And that really, at the end of the day, is going to exacerbate, again, how long the impact is, how long the outage is, and people are not going to be nearly as happy about this at the end of the day. And so what's the solution? Well, the solution quite simply is a status page like StatusCast that can send out incident notifications. And so you could do a couple things with this. One, you can provide people a source of truth for what's going on. Giving a user a resource to say, oh, I can't get into SharePoint. Let me go check the status page and see, oh, okay, they're currently have an outage listed. Well, as an end user, again, we can go back into my story here. We go back a couple slides. Server crashes. I can't log in. Well, if I go to the status page and I see that there's already a reported issue, as that end user, I don't have to go submit that support ticket anymore. I don't have to go ask a colleague. I don't have to do as much troubleshooting. My day, my productivity has been saved slightly. Yes, maybe I can't get into this right now, but I know that the team is aware of it, that they're on top of it, and they'll get back to me through the status page. That means I can go on to the next task. Again, maybe I can't complete what this was, but I can minimize the amount of time that I have spent within here. Similarly, again, if we have users who are aware of what's going on, they have no need to submit those support tickets. And like I mentioned, I was in support for a long time. This is the reason why we built StatusCast, which is, we would simply have downtime. People would flood the support lines when I was a support manager, and we figured there had to be a better way of doing this because, again, like I said, you're just answering the same inquiry over and over and over again, and that's taking up time. It's wasting your team's time, and then going back to the idea of not having to submit those support tickets, we're not sidetracking DevOps as much anymore either, right? DevOps is not hearing from 30 different locations what's going on. Can I get a summary of what this is to understand it? That information could be published to the status page. And so if we come back out here a little bit further back to this slide, that's a great retelling of that story, right? We've already improved it drastically just by simply giving folks a resource where they can go and see what's going on in real time. And you can really make that even better if you can send out notifications proactively. So again, that story, we can rewrite it even better one more time. Server crashes. There's some automation going on. We see a ticket comes into something like Zurant and it gets automatically posted to StatusCast. Well, what if, and we'll go back with this slide one more time, I promise, server crashes. What if I never have to experience this issue? The customer can't log in. I got an email 2 minutes ago saying, hey, SharePoint's down right now. We're aware of it, and we'll let you know when it's back up and running. Now, I don't even have to experience that frustration. I don't have to experience any lost productivity in some sense. I can just know, okay, I'll come back to this task in a half hour. I'll kind of just chug on with my day and go to the next thing, typical thing I had to do. Again, even more so, we've probably eliminated most if not all of the support tickets that would come in because everybody who needed to know about something going down is now already informed. They can go to the status page to get more information. But again, we want to rewrite this story so that we can really save the productivity of everybody, the end user, the support folks, and the DevOps engineers. We want to really kind of minimize, like I said, that blast radius of the incident. The incident's still going to happen, but having something like the status page, this really can streamline the process, and it can turn, what can sometimes be customer service nightmares into actually success stories. One of the interesting things we saw when we started implementing status page for organizations was, you bolster that transparency for yourself and for your organization. People become a little bit more forgiving in some ways of when there is an issue, just because you're open and honest about it. People are streamlined. They get that information. And at the end of the day, you've provided them a source of truth for being able to see what's going on. And there's a lot of different functionalities that StatusCast has that really lets you kind of expand on this. So, we'll talk about this a little bit further in the webinar when we look at some examples and bring up my demo. But, it's not just one status page view to view them all. I've worked with some organizations who have just really, really large data sets, hundreds of services, if not maybe thousands that are being contained in the status page. How can they give this, a view to somebody without throwing them into an ocean? Because you really don't want to throw people into an ocean of data. You want to give them something clear. And that's where we can kind of provide you custom views. So that way things are filtered down to what's relevant to you. People can create what's called component subscription. So, when we are getting notified, you're not getting notified about, every single service within the organization. You can kind of pick and choose which ones are the most relevant to you. I mentioned notifications. This is one of the most important and valuable aspects of something like StatusCast. When there is an issue, let us be the communication mechanism for you. That end user communication piece in the incident management lifecycle I showed, that's where StatusCast really wants to insert itself and to really help you excel within the incident management. So being proactive, we can send out emails, text messages, Slack, MS Teams, WebEx, Cisco WebEx. We can do RSS feed updates, webhook posts. We can send out things like Twitter and Facebook. If you could think of a way to kind of get information out relative to your incident, we more than likely support it. And more specifically, I mentioned this in the last slide, we want to target the right audience. So, Again, when you have a status page that might have hundreds of services, it is not valuable to an end user to send them a message about everything under the sun. If it's not relevant to them, they're eventually going to stop looking at those messages. So we want to be able to target people and make sure you're getting an informed message that's relevant to you, that's worth you clicking into seeing what's going on. Because that's going to be, again, where we get all the value, getting ahead of the issue, being proactive, and so, kind of saving everyone else's time from submitting those support tickets and bothering DevOps. So notifications are a really, really big aspect of what StatusCast delivers. There's a lot of flexibility around here. So when we open up the demo, we will kind of look through some of the options that StatusCast has within this realm. I also want to talk about, just completing the circuit. A lot of us today might be using an ITSM vendor such as Zurnt, our favorite one out there. And coupling StatusCast with an ITSM solution like Zurnt really allows you to kind of complete the circuit. You can have direct incidents kind of creep in to StatusCast automatically just based on tickets rolling into Zurnt, whether that's someone emailing an issue, submitting a request from a self-service portal, or maybe we have a automation set up with something like an observability platform like a Logic Monitor or a New Relic or maybe a Pingdom, right? All of these things can be incorporated into Zurnt, and then Zurnt can say, okay, we have this critical service that is, it's a top level impacting incident. It's totally down. It's impacting multiple users. What's the most helpful thing we can do to the rest of our support team? Well, it could be to get the word out through something like StatusCast, have it pop up on the status page, have notifications go out really in a streamlined, effective manner. And this way, again, the ITSM solution becomes a little bit more of a direct source of truth for us pumping this out. And it gives us just that streamlined integration. And part of our demo will be looking at how this would work within something like Zurnt. So we will be covering that in a little bit more detail as well. StatusCast also excels at being able to incorporate statuses from other vendors and service providers. So, it's not only about putting up a status page that represents your organization directly, what you're managing, what you're maintaining, but, all organizations in this day and age are relying on SaaS vendors, whether it's something like an Office 365, or maybe you have something deployed on AWS, or, again, you're sending out text messages through Twilio. All of those vendors have public-facing status pages. So it would be great if we can incorporate and import those statuses automatically into StatusCast, and then again, give us that kind of single source of truth more holistically for your whole organization. So there's lots of value, and again, we'll look at how these kind of get incorporated a little bit more as we get into our demo. But to kind of round things out for this part of the webinar, I wanted to talk about just some real life incidents that have occurred. Some of these are going to be ones that everyone may be aware of. But, when we talk about, like I said, incident management, that whole time is money idea, I think it's good to know, when there are big incidents in the wild that affect a lot of people, it's important for us to understand that. And it's important for us to kind of have some of those pocket stories ready when we need them. And I think the most relevant one for everybody is going to be CrowdStrike. That happened within the last year, in last July. It's easily regarded as the largest IT outage in history. Nothing actually comes close to it at this point. Approximately 8.5 million systems crashed, and the financial damage caused by this was upwards of $10 billion. This is just, like I said earlier, incidents are inevitable. When you see a large provider like this go down, and you see the number of other folks that go down, it really makes you realize how interconnected we all are through the internet. And this idea of, incidents are inevitable is very prevalent here. So having an incident management structure and kind of plan there is very, very important, because you don't want to be a CrowdStrike and have just a disastrous thing occur and see, to see all the money that gets poured through there. So it really is kind of telling, again, how interconnected we all are. This goes back to our cloud service provider feature I was talking about, where we can import those service statuses. This sort of stuff can become really important. A slightly older one would be this AWS outage that a lot of us would probably remember from 2021. AWS essentially DDoSed themselves by some weird kind of network scaling procedure that occurred. This lasted about 8 hours, not nearly as long as the CrowdStrike, so it wasn't as large and as long in a lot of ways. But we saw a lot of large systems go down from it: Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, Netflix, Coinbase, Wall Street Journal, Ticketmaster, just a handful to name. But, again, another large outage simply caused by a weird procedure internally. And again, everybody is connected to Amazon in some way, shape, or form. There's so many people connected to AWS. When they have an outage, especially a big one, we all feel it. And so again, this is another area where we think time is money. How much lost revenue was there for Disney Plus or for Amazon sales during that period, simply because the service was down. It was probably astronomical at the end of the day. And the last real world example, we're going to circle back to this company during my kind of demo a little bit, is a company called Fastly. They are a software as a service provider. In 2021, they had an issue that occurred there. They provide CDN services to a lot of websites out there. Fastly is a great example of a company with a good, mature incident management process. So within an hour, they had this nasty outage. I think it was caused by a bug. They had it wrapped up. They had it and they had it taken care of. And Fastly is actually a StatusCast customer. That's why I like to talk about them, because they're a good success story. Back in 2021, they were using a competitor, and they had kind of outgrown the status page that they were in, and they were looking at other vendors, and they found us. They eventually wrote a blog about it and kind of why they switched to us. But just understanding, StatusCast is not quite in the cookie cutter nature of things. I like to be able to kind of talk about this, and like I said, we're going to bring up them in just a couple of minutes to look at their status page and kind of how they excel at providing this information out to folks in real time. But enough of the slide deck, enough of just talking. I'm more of a person who likes to show off the app. So I want to dive into kind of a demo of the product. We'll look at a couple examples, for the remainder of this webinar today. And again, these are kind of the general topics that we'll discuss, but we'll see, we might pivot into a couple different areas depending on where we are. So let's jump out of this deck. Like I said, I want to hop over into kind of a demo mode to walk us through the application a bit more. And let's just start with, this from if you're using Zurnt, because, again, this is really going to be where you're going to get a lot of value out of something like StatusCast coupled with Zurnt. And that's going to start with the fact that we have a really nice out-of-the-box integration with Zurnt. So, when I sign into my Zurnt account, I'm in my QA account. If I have an enterprise account, I get this included at no additional cost. If I go to the App Store, we have an out-of-the-box integration option for StatusCast. So to create your status page, your StatusCast account, and kind of get everything up and running, all you have to do is actually go through this simple setup where we're going to ask you what service instances within your within your Zurnt account do you want linked to something like StatusCast. And so it's actually just as simple as coming in here and saying, oh, these are all the service instances we want. You really don't have to define any more than that. And then you initially click that initial install button. And what that's going to do from our side is it's first going to create you a status page and a StatusCast account. So this is a separate resource outside of the specialist portal within Zurnt, but we will actually add a link to the specialist portal to StatusCast directly. So once we get it initially installed, this is where from an administrative point of view, we can click this, and we're going to be brought to the base page. Now, like I said, just simply doing that install, it does a lot of the nice kind of heavy lifting for us if we're coming from something like Zurnt, simply because it's going to start up the page. It's going to give us a quick design of what might be going on. Or I'm sorry, a quick page design, which those are customizable. We'll kind of come back to that idea in general. And on the Zurnt side as well, it's going to add some automations and rules so that if I have a top level or impacting events, I don't want to have to manually go into StatusCast and have the double work of recreating that manually. I want it to just appear automatically. So if we come back into Zurnt real quick, just before this webinar started, I did open up a issue, my SAP database. It's down again. It seems to happen a lot, unfortunately. So we initially had this come in. It was a 500 error, but it was just recorded as a medium impacting incident. It was only affecting just the one user. But, in this case, in most organizations, you get a report of this. You start to go and analyze it. We go back to that incident management flow we were talking about earlier. We start to analyze it. We think, oh my gosh, okay, we've actually confirmed this is a full outage. I'm transitioning to the major incident model. So by me resaving this and setting it to top and putting it to in progress, saying, hey, yeah, there is actually a true top level incident going on, and it's affecting this SAP basis production, which I have linked to StatusCast. That's all Zurnt needs to know to be able to take the next step for us with StatusCast. And if we come back to this page real quick, we'll actually see, again, we already have this event that was started just under an hour ago in my account. SAP is down again. Oh my gosh. We can also see in this other widget down here that, again, my kind of all of my various components that have been shared, these are now showing this basis production is currently unavailable. So, this is the idea that, without really any additional heavy lifting, without any, other requirement from the agent, within Zurnt, I was able to go and populate this page with an incident. And we'll go into this one a little bit further, and we'll resolve it before the end of this demo today. But before we kind of go do that and look at the full incident workflow, we have this nice page that StatusCast, generated for us out of the box. And, there's a number of widgets that are being, that are being shown here. But the reality is, for your organization, you may not love all these default widgets. You may not love the order. What does StatusCast let you do in terms of customizing the page? Well, the answer is that we really have no cookie cutter in terms of what a status page should look like. I'm going to real quick hop over to a different page of mine. So this is another demo page. You can see a fairly different looking, some similar widgets going here, similar-ish the layout, but I've already added in some CSS. If we go one step over, we're going to go to my first real customer example, Fastly. Again, similar-ish to that last demo one of mine, but you can see here, they're only choosing to show 2 widgets to me up front. Fastly is a great example of kind of offering like a hybrid status page. And this is a big thing within the status page world. You can have public status pages and private status pages, or maybe hybrid, where in Fastly's case, I can come in here, I can see some basic information about upcoming maintenances they have planned. I can look at their service kind of catalog at the various products and services they have. And we can see, they had a particular, a degradation of service yesterday that boiled over. I can kind of go back in time here. This page is very minimal. If I were to click login in the top right, if I was an actual Fastly customer, I could log in and I could actually see additional widgets and additional information appear to me. So you can, like we had in that slide deck earlier, that slide with the additional filters. There's lots of ways we can kind of customize the page. It doesn't have to be this one view to end them all. We'll real quick go over to MRI Software. This is a software as a service provider. Again, fairly different looking page. They have a very long list of components here. But to them, the top level of this organization of these service components, for them makes sense to represent them from a region perspective first. And then we'll go one more example over to a really styled version. This is Malwarebytes. Very different looking page from the previous two. Again, they actually have a lot of CSS in here. I think my computer is on dark mode right now, so I'm seeing a dark mode of their CSS. If I was on light mode, I'd see the opposite. But again, very, very minimal page. They want to just show you, hey, last 60 days worth of information about these 3 services. I can hover over and see if they did have an issue. Or maybe I want to give some folks the ability to go back in time, maybe to search through events if we want to give them just more of a static list. And then my last customer example is going to be VCU. This is a university here in the States. We love universities and education in general with StatusCast. It's a great use case overall. But again, this is a very information-rich page. They have lots of active alerts. They have lots of maintenances that go on. You can imagine large universities. There's a lot going on from the IT perspective. And so again, branding, this is all relevant to them. They have a nice calendar here. And then this footer was just actually incorporated just from their .edu site. And this kind of just, again, goes back to that statement I said a couple of minutes ago. There's no cookie cutter for what a status page should be. What your organization wants to show to your end users, whether those are employees or maybe customers or maybe a mix of both, it's not necessarily going to be the same thing for every audience. So we are not going to force you to have one version of a status page, which you'll see on some of the competitors. Sometimes it's just a copy paste from every customer example they have. We're the total opposite of that. So if I come back to my other demo page real quick, I know I'm doing a lot of tab flying around, so I apologize about that. But we're just going to click this button because I'm signed in as an administrator and I have a quick page design section. I'm not going to dive into this too deep because I could spend all day long telling people about how they can customize their pages. But just to highlight a quick couple things, first, layout. This is just easy drag and drop. Tell us where you want the order, what you want the order of things to be. Again, there's no right answer to this at the end of the day. We're also going to have lots of options for all these widgets. So if I expand this little arrow here to the right, we can see all the various widgets that we could potentially add. I have a lot of them in this page already, but we're going to have options on a lot of these to really just simplify and kind of let you control what you are showing on the status page, because that's another important aspect. Status pages, they're a tool for transparency, but it's controlled transparency. We don't want you to feel like you're forced to put too much information out on the page. You have a lot of control over that. So I'm going to switch tabs real quick as a good example. This history grid Fastly has up here. I think they have theirs configured. It might only let me go back like 10 weeks in time. Eventually, I'm not going to be able to click this right arrow anymore. So you can see it just disappeared. So this is a good example of we want to give you really simple controls over determining how much data is released. So if I come back to my page, this is the options for that widget. As simple as how many pages back in time do you want to let somebody go? So in my account, I'm only letting you go 2 weeks back in time. Maybe I don't want you to have any historic history. We can do that as well. So it's really up to you. Some status pages we'll see are a little bit more like that Malwarebytes, or I'm sorry, threat down, where it's really just kind of like, what's the current info? Other ones might give us rich history. Some might be a little bit more in the middle, but again, there's no right answer to this, especially if you're managing more than one status page, which, as I said earlier, you can have public and private status pages. And on the StatusCast platform itself, you can create as many status pages as you need. So a really common kind of setup we see is you might have a status page that's like private for your company, for your employees, but then maybe your customers, you have a public facing page. It just gives like some very generic info. You can link those together so that way you're not still having to duplicate things. But again, there are use cases for potentially creating multiple status pages. And there's a lot we can do with those at the end of the day. But, I don't want to spend, like I said, all day long on the customization aspect of StatusCast, kind of the layout and all that. One other area just to kind of point out, just to kind of show us how we can very easily start to see how information can kind of be split up. I mentioned earlier, we want to make information relevant to end users, and that's going to be kind of come in the form of two different things. One is we can create filtering on the status page. So this current page I'm on, there are a lot of different components that are available here. I can expand data centers and see NA1. Again, we can go several levels deep here. When we get to pages that have a lot of different components going on, that can where we can start to think about, okay, maybe are there audiences that should see specific things? And a really common example of this might be, I'm going to go up to this one, say, hey, do we have audiences by customers? And I have this filter exposed. This is not something you usually see. This just lets me kind of easily change my view from kind of a nobody to, let's say, I authenticated and I'm customer A. Well, customer A only has access to a handful of things, whereas, again, customer B is going to have access to their own groupings of things. So whether it's different customers who maybe have access to different products or who have access to different services, or maybe employees. So like what a salesperson logs in and sees versus what a support or an IT person logs in and see, you can kind of control that to some degree. And we can have these kind of linked up automatically. So if we're using something like a single sign-on through like a Zurant, where we're using SAML or OpenID Connect, we can say, oh, okay, this person's department is sales. So when they come to the page, I don't want them to see this list and to choose from these. I just want them automatically to be shown sales. So there's a lot of ways that we can kind of filter the pages, again, to make these a little bit more relevant. On that same topic of, kind of relevance, I mentioned earlier with this idea of notifications. I'm going to switch real quick back to my Fastly page. Again, we can provide people a mechanism to come in and say, I want to get notified. Again, this is that proactive piece. We want people to either sign up for notifications on their own, or maybe we want to use an integration with Zurant, or maybe an integration with StatusCast to front load people. So we can say, hey, again, our organization has 2,000 end users. We want all 2,000 end users to get subscribed to the page. We can do that in one quick step, or let people kind of self-serve. But the thing we want to highlight here is, again, I can come in here and say, my email address is eric@statuscast.com. I want to get an email about just particular products and services. For Fastly, I want to know if they post something about COVID. I use their TLS encryption and, OHTTP and CDN. Only if they post about one of these four things do I want to get an email. In any other case, in any other component, I want to be left alone. This is important because, like I said earlier, we want to make sure that when we are sending out notifications that they have relevance and they have value to the end users. And the quickest way to diminish value from a notification perspective is to over-notify. So if people are getting notices about things that just aren't relevant to them, they're eventually going to stop looking at those or just unsubscribe altogether. This is important. We want to make sure people have those granularities. I'm actually already subscribed to this one, so it's telling me, hey, click this button to go in and kind of get some additional views. Similarly, I'll go into this page where I'm already a subscriber, and we'll just see, again, some of the more the granular options. So, again, I might want to pick and choose what components that I have been particularly subscribed to. But we also might want to be kind of granular with our notification preferences. So in this case, send me an email about everything, but, I'm getting text messages. Only send me a text message when something's down. I don't need to hear about maintenances. I don't need to hear about informational like product releases and things like that. Not from a text message. I just want the text message to be the important ones. So this gives us, again, that granularity for the end user to also kind of tailor what's the most important thing to them, because this is how they're going to tell us how to get the most out of the system for everybody kind of involved. So the status pages, great overall resource. Like I said, very, very filtered, very customized. You're not kind of stuck into this one view for them all. Large organizations can really support filtered and kind of unique views so that people aren't kind of just waiting around in a sea of information. And then, like I said as well, notifications are going to be a really important aspect of StatusCast as well. If we could be proactive, like I mentioned towards the beginning when we were looking at the incident timeline, the best version of that story we can rewrite is by sending out a notification and really getting around the end user even having to experience the issue directly. So now that we've looked a bit about, just again at the status page in general, we have a couple other things that we can look at. Let's close out some of these extra tabs. And, we want to come back to the idea of how do we manage incidents within StatusCast. Currently, we have this existing incident that was registered in my Zurnt account that has made it over to my Zurnt status page. If I come into this other demo account, though, I just want to show you that we can still manually create stuff. So even if we have this integration set up with Zurnt, you might still have other items that are maybe not coming directly in from Zurnt that you might want to provide a status about. So you can always come into StatusCast and we can create events manually if they weren't coming in through an integration. An event to us is going to be something that has a title. We're concerned with the start date. We want to know what the status was. Was it unavailable? Maybe is it maintenance? We have some other statuses that you don't always see, from like the ITEL perspective. So maybe if we're just monitoring or if we're investigating something, it hasn't become like a full-blown issue. Maybe we're just letting people know we think something's up. You have some other options within here. We're always going to be concerned with what was affected. So what was that component? And in StatusCast, a component, a service component, there's not a strict definition to them. Like I said, if we're importing these from something like Zurnt, those are going to be initially your kind of service instances, so representative of kind of the services you're offering. But organizationally, again, if I come back to my Zurnt page, I added, I have Widget International here, and I have a number of items under here. I also just categorically have service providers listed outside of that as well. So you're not locked into like a specific hierarchy of this. You have a lot of play within StatusCast for kind of ordering things for the end user of the status page. Again, if you have a very technical name in Zurnt and you don't want that technical name to be what the end user sees, you can rewrite those very easily. We thought of all those sorts of things. But we're always going to be relative. An incident is always going to be about affecting a component. And lastly, there's just the message that we would throw in here as well. Again, we have content templates, so I can very easily, as an end user, come in and get this form filled out. I think the industry average is about 12 minutes if I asked an engineer to give me a quick summary of what's going on for an incident. The reality for a status page is you don't need a whole lot of details when you're telling people that a service is impacted. At the end of the day, somebody really just needs to know that it is impacted, that you're aware of it, and that you're going to get back to them. Once it's resolved, that's when you can post a lot of details about an RCA. So when we think about content templates, this is where we can kind of really streamline the process, within one click. In this case, I have a formatted one. Let me go back to this other one. Within one click, I have macros in here to kind of pull out the status I was selecting, to pull the components I'm impacting here. So with one simple click, we can get pretty much the whole thing written up with a very good template. We can click publish. And this is the point where StatusCast might say, okay, do we want to send out notifications? If this were coming through something like an integration like with Zurnt, we'll come back to that. This would be automated where we'd say, yes, we do want to send notifications. StatusCast within this account says, okay, we know how many people are subscribed. And in this case, how many people are subscribed to Caption Maker. So I only have one person who's going to get an email because of this. We'll click publish. And now we have this event that is live. It's in progress. Again, from here, I could simply come in here and we could, add additional update. If we want to let people know, maybe it's no longer degraded. So let's do that real quick. Let's downgrade this from performance just to monitoring. And before I publish this, let's check it out on the page. We'll click this button to open up a tab. We can kind of see the details view of that event. We'll come out here. We'll also see, again, my current status has now been degraded. When we come back into the admin portal here, we're going to downgrade that. It's not degraded anymore. Now it's, we think we fixed it. It's now just a monitoring. We'll click publish and notify. Again, as an end user, very easy. I didn't have to go and come up with a list of everybody I think's impacted. I'm just an end user interacting with StatusCast. StatusCast through this idea of subscribers, which will come in here real quick. It knows I'm here. It knows I am subscribed to the Caption Maker subcomponents. So it's naturally going to say, okay, Eric needs to be notified about this. And we can see here in this case, coming back here, I just sent a notification for each of these. We'll refresh the page. We can see again, current status has now gone to that monitoring. And if we come back to my details page, we can see more of the full timeline appears here. And then, again, at the end of the day, we can always come in here and resolve this. If I were doing this manually, we'll click resolve. I have a template for this as well. So again, I don't have to do a whole lot. This would be a point where, again, we would start to work through this. Eventually, we would have an RCA, and you can do an additional post giving people that details. But again, in the moment when we're just talking to end users about just the status of what's going on, you don't need to provide a book of information. You just need to let them know it's down or it's back up and running. If you can achieve that, you're going to make a lot of people happy. And again, that idea of saving productivity, you're going to go a long way just by simply doing that. And so in this case, we'll come back to this page one more time. We will click refresh. We're going to see maintenance is complete because I use the maintenance template. We'll come back out to my main page and we will just see that everything is going to be back to green across the board. Yep. So that's the basic flow if I were going to be doing this automatically. Let's come back into my Zurnt event. We're just going to click edit and we're going to put this as in progress or as completed. We'll say we resolved it. And let's do today. And we'll say that it lasted approximately, let's just say 1 hour. And come back in here and say this is resolved in all caps. We will click save. And now on the back end, again, Zurnt is going to see the integration, the automation StatusCast has installed. It's going to say, okay, we have a top level incident that was just marked as resolved. So there's going to be some communication going on between the two systems. If we come back to this page, let's take a quick look. We'll refresh. You may have noticed that the box I had up top that was called active incidents, that just disappeared. It's because I no longer have any active incidents. So we can see the current status of SAP. It's back to normal. We can come in here. We can see over this historic widget that's giving me access again. We can see here, again, back up and running. So simply by interacting with that integration that's pre-installed within Zurnt, all the work was done for me. I, as an admin, could come in here. Let's real quick go into the incident. We'll go into the incident view as an admin. We're going to see here, again, in these stages, notifications were set out. I didn't have to do anything else as a specialist in Zurnt. I just had to handle the ticket once the DevOps team got it resolved. We closed it out. StatusCast knew, and now StatusCast has gone and alerted everybody, hey, this is back up and running. So you can start to get the sense of how seamless this is, how easy it could be or how easy it should be when we're dealing with incidents and incident communications. We don't want end users to have to spend a lot of extra time getting this information out. It should just be as easy as just managing the incident as you are already trained to do, and let something like a slick integration with StatusCast kind of take over. Now, that's a good example of integrating with a system like Zurnt, like an ITSM system. I mentioned earlier as well, and I'm going to switch back to my other account for this, that we have a lot of different ways to integrate with existing service providers. So people who have existing status pages. We'll just click new integrations under beacons real quick. Beacons and StatusCast just really represents anytime we have some sort of third party that we want to interact with StatusCast and to create an incident, it's going to be considered a beacon. So this could be a third-party status page. It could also be something coming in from an uptime monitoring system or an application performance system. Honestly, we can integrate with any system in the world as long as you can send us a webhook ping or you can send us an email, then we can create a beacon integration. And so if we stick with these third-party ones, again, this is just the idea that we're up to 196 different vendors. We track their public status pages. So let's say I use ActiveCampaign within my business. If ActiveCampaign posts something to their status page that might be relevant to me, I can click next. We'll add this quick integration. But reality is ActiveCampaign, like any other status page in the world, is going to have a representation of components, service components. What are they offering? I'm based in the EU. I want to know if they post something about their API availability, mail sending availability. If those two things have an issue, I want their page to communicate to my page and to make that available. So when we click edit, update, what this is actually going to do is it's going to add a couple more components to my account. And that's how I'm able to, if we come back to this page, you'll notice I have two sections here overall. I have kind of my service status stuff. This is all the stuff I manage directly, the servers we're running in AWS, the product, the stuff that I'm managing directly. And then all the cloud provider services, I have I'm using the Key Vault in Azure. I'm using Viva's CRM. We're using Office 365. If they post something about these, I want to have, looks like we can see those new ones got added already. I'll have to go and reorganize them real quick. But we're able to see these third-party events. And so this is an idea of that, for a status page, maybe geared a little bit more for employees, kind of internal for an organization. Now you can create that single source of truth. Both what you're managing directly, your SharePoint stuff goes down, but also, again, maybe the Office 365 SharePoint goes down, or Office 365's Outlook goes down, and that impacts your ability for employees to send email. Having one single source of truth becomes very, very valuable. There's a great case study we did with Cisco. This is kind of around this, the idea of creating kind of like that holistic status page for your organization. I highly recommend requesting that case study from us. Cisco, as you can imagine, is a huge IT organization. And before StatusCast, they did not have a good page that they could send any employee to, whether it was a support or a salesperson or a C-suite exec. And now with StatusCast, they have a page similar to this where they can say, hey, this is everything that Cisco IT manages and runs, but here's everything that the service providers do for us as well. And when there is an issue with one or the other, it's all contained into one spot. A lot of organizations, if you don't have something like this, you might be just subscribed to 12 different status pages, and those are going to come in different formats and different so on. And so, we certainly don't want to have that happen to us. We don't want to, make our lives easier when there are issues. We want to kind of centralize that as much as possible. And so StatusCast is going to really excel at that. We want to bring in information, again, whether it's coming in from a third-party status page, or like I mentioned earlier, the idea of being able to integrate with anybody as long as they can send us a webhook URL. So this is a quick PagerDuty example. And this is just the idea that, again, I'm going to be sent some JSON data from PagerDuty. Within StatusCast, we let you create a codeless UI to create rule sets to say, hey, when the status of this JSON payload is trigger, that's PagerDuty telling me I have a new event. We want to create a new status. When we're told that the status is resolved, again, that's telling us that an incident was closed out in PagerDuty. All this logic is pretty universal. If it's an observability, like a logic monitor sees that something goes down, it's going to have a state that's going to be captured. We can key off of that. And then we can also make distinctions here. So, my Zernt example I was talking about earlier, I knew it automatically was sending out emails because I had a rule similar to this. We're saying, hey, if it's a top level event, we want to send out notifications. If it's not, maybe we don't want to send out any notifications. You have a lot of granularity there. There's not one kind of cookie cutter, one solution fits all in that sense. There's a lot of flexibility here within StatusCast. And, again, at the end of the day, our goal, like I said, from the very beginning is, we want to reduce that impact of an incident. Incidents are inevitable. A lot of these tools, though, are going to let you streamline that process. They're going to let you get users informed. They're going to help us see a reduction in support tickets when there are incidents, and probably just keep the DevOps team a little bit more on track, a little bit happier about it. And then at the end of the day, everyone's happier about it. The end user, the support, the DevOps, the stakeholders, the VIP. When we have a clear kind of running incident management program that uses something like StatusCast, you get a lot of value at it at the end of the day. So I think at this point, I wanted to save a little bit of time for the end just for us to go through any questions. And I just want to see if we actually have, I haven't seen any pop in. It does not look like we've had any questions come through, which probably means I've either done a good enough job talking and answered any question before it came out, or we're just kind of mulling through. This is a lot of information, certainly to digest in a single webinar. I think there's one last topic that we'd want to just take a quick look at, since we haven't had any questions and we have a couple more minutes, and that would just be coming back to the idea of subscribers. I mentioned this earlier, kind of getting the idea of subscribers coming into StatusCast. This is a management aspect. Like you said, we can get subscribers into StatusCast pretty easily in a number of different ways, whether we are using an integration with something like Zernt to try to send them through single sign-on to StatusCast. We can also always do subscription invitations where we might be bulk loading people in here. The ability to kind of come in here with a CSV at like 10,000 people if you want in one shot is very useful. We can also, like I mentioned earlier, integrate directly just from the status page. And so those are going to be options where, again, if I come back here just to the status page in the page designer, if we want to offer that subscribe button up top, you certainly can. If you want to gate things like that, again, at the end of the day, if I come into page designer, it's as easy as just saying, hey, I don't want to allow subscriptions. You do not need a web developer to come in here to start hiding stuff in CSS or to writing custom JavaScript. Our goal is really to avoid that at all costs. We do certainly support adding custom HTML into custom content. And like I said, as we saw in some of those examples, we do support custom CSS and custom content. But our goal is to try to, through the UI, give you enough options where any user, regardless of any technical level, would be able to log in, set up the account in the way they need, and then manage it in the way that we want. And I do see a question did come through the chat in terms of, do we integrate with Zabbix? That's a good question. Let's actually take a quick look. I don't remember off the top of my head if we have a beacon for Zabbix in the cloud one, but this is always, we'll add Zabbix in here. This is kind of always step one that I go through with anybody when we're setting up a new status page, which is just to see, hey, what types of service providers do we offer? So Zabbix isn't in here. What would be the next natural state I would do? I would go look for, do they have a status page? And, in this case, if they do have one, we would be able to integrate with them. Looks like this here, they don't. So they don't have a forum where you can do that. This would be an example where, could we still integrate with something like Zabbix even if they didn't have a public status page? The answer would be absolutely yes. Like I said earlier, as long as we have some way to be able to integrate with somebody through webhooks or emails, then we can, Zabbix. I think I spelled that wrong there. Let's go double check. Easy way to do this is to do status.the company. Okay, so they don't have a status page. But, as I was saying, again, same general idea. If there's some sort of hook, where we can get an observability ping to look at it, if they have or sometimes they might have a private status page. If they offer that and they can send you an email, you could always forward that email to us, or in this case, let me just come in here and say, I want to create what we call an email beacon. This spins up an email address for you to use where you could send those service alerts to. So even if we don't have an out-of-the-box option, like I said, as long as it can send us data in some way, shape, or form, you would certainly be able to integrate it through that sense. And everything we've also talked about today is also going to be available through an API. So StatusCast is going to be, everything like we've said, it's managing incidents, creating components, content templates, managing our pages. All of those are going to be options through the API as well. So looks like we have another question come through, automatic sync for the top soon. Can we change what the customer sees in StatusCast? That's a really good question. So everything within StatusCast at the end of the day is editable. So, even if, let's say, if we create an incident and we didn't like how the title looked, or maybe we had changed the rule set, we could always come in to StatusCast pretty easily. Let's get out of my editor real quick. And this could be where we could come back to any of these. And this is always editable to the end user. So I could go into the post, and maybe this was just, we accidentally set in this extra one. We wanted just to get rid of it. It's still going to exist in Zurich because we're not going to let you delete that note. But you could say, hey, let's get this, let's get this out of the end user's view. You could easily delete it, or you could come in to maybe just edit it. This is another nice thing that you could do just so that way, again, if we want to correct the text. A lot of times, again, we are not going to take the exact note that the user sends in. The rule set is going to, try to kind of give us a more of a generic statement around that. Because like I said, especially with updates, the generic updates are a little bit better because people are going to just, they need to know what's going on. They don't necessarily need a book of information. So you can be as kind of minimal with this as you want, or put in as much as you'd like. There's really, like I said, no right or wrong answer there. And if you ever come into an issue, again, if you're managing something automatically with Zurich, or if we have to, even if we're managing it directly, you also have the ability to create drafts, or in this case, unpublished. So if I don't want this to be available to anybody on my page after the fact, maybe again, it was just an incorrect incident, doesn't need to be there, I could delete it, or in this case, just unpublish it. Now it's a draft. And this is another neat thing that we can do where, again, especially with integrations with something like Zurich, maybe you want one extra level of protection, say, okay, Zurich sent us this incident, but we want, maybe we want a service rep to go in and confirm that, two key situation. Now we can go and click publish, and now we can kind of put it out, maybe send out notifications. So there's a lot of ways that we can work with this. There's a lot of workflows that we can adhere to. But StatusCast, it's a great flexible platform. If you're a Zurnt user today, especially if you're on Enterprise, you're going to get it included for free. So I really highly recommend anybody who has Zurnt to go check out StatusCast. It is also, standalone as well. So if you are interested in just the StatusCast functionality, certainly do reach out to us. If you contact us at sales@zurnt.com, or if you go through your Zurnt rep, or if you go to the Zurnt website, you can you can ask for a demo, and we can get you some more specific information. But we are at time for this webinar. It was a pleasure having everybody on here. I hope you learned a lot today. And again, if you have any questions, you're interested in learning more about StatusCast, please reach out to Audit Now. Please reach out to us directly at Zurnt. We are happy to give you more information and to work with you there. So have a great rest of your day, and I hope you've learned something.
Okay, thank you all today, and special thank you, Eric, for the fantastic presentation. I hope that everyone found it engaging and insightful as I did. And hopefully we see everyone during the next webinar of us. So
have a good one, everyone.
Bye-bye.